Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I encourage you to hit that like button, to subscribe for more quality content, and to share with your friends. I also encourage you to check out the playlists and the playlist tab for more videos and to see some of the videos that I've been making. If you really want to help this channel, I encourage you to subscribe and to let other people know and to definitely like and share. And I also encourage you to check out my books. I will put the link to my author page in the description. Checking out my books, buying my books, reviewing my books, and sharing my books definitely helps me a lot, and I really much appreciate that. I work very hard on my videos and my books, so any encouragement towards that or any support for that helps me go a long way. Today I'm going to talk about a book for my Mind and Art series called Confessions of an English Opium-Eater by Thomas de Quincey. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'm Phoenix, and I recently read a book for my Mind and Art series called Confessions of an English Opium-Eater by Thomas de Quincey. Thomas de Quincey, if you don't have any context for this book, was a writer in the Romantic period of literature, and specifically of British literature, which includes notable poets such as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and other writers as well. And I chose this book because I wanted to continue an exploration of the mind, and specifically I wanted to think about addiction. You may remember my episode Beautiful Boy, which is also part of my Mind and Art series. In this series I like to talk about art, the mind, and some of the things that connect the mind and certain difficulties that we may face, and basically tying that in, such as addiction or mental illness or various things, but definitely also focusing on the positive contributions of these kinds of processes. And so I very much wanted to do that. Now, this book is a very interesting account of a man who used opium. He basically ate opium from what it looked like in the description, in the actual book and in his descriptions. And it's very interesting thinking about addiction as being something that happened all the way back in the 1800s. And so the thing that's very powerful to know about opium is that the opium plant is used in order to synthesize dangerous drugs such as heroin. And so this opium is highly addictive, and you find this out while reading this book. Now, to give it a little bit of background, Thomas de Quincey describes his life, and he describes it through accounts, and not all of it deals with addiction necessarily, but it does deal with his experiences, and his experiences as an individual, perhaps struggling with addiction. And it's very interesting how he describes his account of living in the world in the 1800s and what life is like, and there are a lot of very interesting accounts. But what I really wanted to focus on as part of my Mind and Art series is some of his actual process relating to addiction, and some of his process relating to some of his other struggles, which would include poverty, and I wouldn't describe him as necessarily experiencing mental illness, but maybe mental disruptions through addiction. And so without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, the drug was given to Thomas whenever he was struggling. I believe he was struggling with a toothache, and his tooth was bothering him, and so in order to take away the pain, it was recommended that he take the opium to reduce the pain. But here's the thing. With reading the story and reading his own account of his stories and the things that he was experiencing, it is very interesting to realize that the reason why he became addicted to the opium in the first place was because it was given with him to deal with something very existential and unavoidable, which is very human physical pain. And it is really troubling to think about that in the context of the opioid crisis that we've seen in modern times. And if a drug is given out to deal with physical pain, such as from a toothache, but maybe also from surgeries or from other ailments that we may have, it is very troubling to think that these drugs can become addictive, and that they can become, as you find out with Thomas, he does get addicted, and that it could start with something as unavoidable as dealing with pain. And that is definitely a very powerful thing to realize, and not necessarily comforting, as you can imagine. And so I think about this in the context if I was experiencing pain, and then I became addicted, I just don't want to imagine what that would be like because it would completely upend my life. And so a lot of the account of this character, of this writer, is that he is describing his own addictions and how it started so innocuous with just dealing with physical pain, but then it became a way of completely numbing all of the pain. And even though there are a lot of different expressions of how people use drugs and why they use drugs, it seems to be a common narrative that people maybe start with dealing with pain, whether mental, emotional, or physical pain, and then it becomes a full-out addiction, a full-blown addiction, because it becomes something that is very unavoidable, the addiction itself, something that people want to be able to numb the pain completely. And that can definitely be a very difficult thing. Now, what's interesting about Thomas is through his account, you realize that he wanted to see drug use as a positive thing. He didn't want to see it as something with negative consequences. He wanted to see it as the thing that took away his pain, that brought meaning to his life, that made him feel richer and more alive and more vibrant. But the unfortunate thing is that it followed another familiar narrative where you start to spiral with the addiction and with the drug itself because you feel as though you can't find meaning without the drug, and you feel as though everything is out of your control and that there's no meaning outside of the drug. And so this is very crushing to think about, to think that because of his experience with the drug that he wasn't able to imagine a life without it. So he wanted to see it as a positive thing, and he does talk throughout the book of the pleasures of opium, which is contrasted by a later section, which is called the pains of opium. He is very much trying to find the positive benefits of using the drug. And I don't want to skew this video in favor of any specific context of drug use. People express drugs differently and they use them for different reasons, and we don't want to assume that we know the reasons all of the time. But in my reading on drug use, especially the harder drugs, I seem to keep running into this narrative where the drug really does become a problem, and you try to justify it and you try to see it as something good, but it continues to be more and more of a problem. And this is exactly what happened to Thomas in this book, which is something that is important to keep in mind. It brought pain, not just because of the addiction, but also the side effects. Whenever he was trying to kick the habit and to be clean from the opium, it seemed as though he experienced a very painful withdrawal, and the withdrawal would last forever. And who would want to experience something like that? And this is something that I don't understand about drug use from reading this book, which is the idea that whenever people are engaging with drugs, that they don't always understand why things get worse, why the drugs don't make it better, why they want to assume that the drug is making things better, that there is a pleasure to it, when there really isn't. It doesn't numb the pain. Or I should say it does numb the pain from what I've seen from the drug, but that doesn't actually take away the pain. It ultimately doesn't take away the problem. And the fascinating thing about this book is that, yes, I am definitely mapping on my own patterns that I've seen from my reading and experience with these things. I've definitely seen these patterns, but this book was also written in the 1800s, before there were all of these synthetic chemicals, before we had really dangerous drugs like methamphetamine. And, thinking about how even with opium, like you can use that to make heroin. Like these are very huge things. And so if I was going to say anything that I think is important, I would describe that this account of Thomas is very important for understanding what it is like to deal with these really powerful plants, chemicals, and drugs. And how this account, which again happened early in the 1800s, is something that is still very much familiar to our day and age now, with all of these things. And so I may have my own view on drugs, which is that I don't think that they are constructive, and that I think that they can be very dangerous. But I think what's very interesting for me to take away from this book is that it certainly is a very complicated issue, and we don't always understand why some of these universal events happen, some of these universal themes and some of these universal happenings. And it doesn't always make sense why these things are always happening. And so again, I may have my own bias, but this is what I was able to read from this book, which was that at the very least it's complicated, and definitely you are going to struggle with these things, such as me definitely struggling with seeing it happen in life and not always being able to understand it. It's not just a struggle for those who are using, but also those who are witnessing usage of drugs. Now, I think one thing that is important to highlight is that Thomas de Quincey was plagued not just by horrible withdrawal symptoms from this plant, but also, and the withdrawal of which was also very horrible, but the drug itself was definitely painful. And this is very important to keep in mind as well. The drug didn't always take away the pain. In fact, sometimes, in many ways, the drug was the cause of pain. So the very thing that you were using to be able to take away the drug, to take away the pain, was the thing that would actually create pain. And so I remember very vivid passages in this book where he is describing nightmares of beasts and burdens and pain and suffering and sacrifice and all of these scary things. And it definitely was very harrowing to read about the struggle of these nightmares that this individual was facing through the drug use. And it definitely is very powerful. But here's the thing. Even with the way that I look at drug use, and even the way that I might analyze this piece of art and this account by Thomas de Quincey, the sobering reality, and the thing that makes drug use very difficult, is that you feel whenever, as you know, just with reading about this character, he definitely felt as though the drugs took away his pain. And even if he knew in some capacity that it didn't actually take away the pain, that it didn't even really numb the feelings because the feelings were always there, it still nonetheless took away the pain, or at least that's what he believed. And that was why he used in the first place. And that is why I think that it is very sobering and troubling to recognize that the reason why people might use something like opium is because they want the pain to be gone. They don't want to experience those things. And so how do you draw an account of this kind of thing? How do you figure out these things, these difficult themes, and these difficult elements to drugs and to the culture of drugs? And the fact that this was happening 200 years ago, over 200 years ago. What do you do with that? And I have to admit, I don't really know. I may have my beliefs, as I've said, but I would have to say that I don't always understand, even with reading this account, what it is like to have to go through these things. And so I definitely empathize with people who are struggling. I don't know why, what it is about drugs and addictive behaviors and the culture that we live in that makes things so difficult, but it does. And I want to understand it more. And so this was one of the reasons why I read this book specifically for my Mind and Art series. My Mind and Art series is a celebration of all of the things that go right, even if it is also an attempt to understand all of the things that go wrong. The reality is that whenever I'm engaging with books, often mental illness and addictions and pain and suffering often come up. And as I've said in past videos, I don't want to overemphasize any link between these kinds of elements with creativity, but it seems that there is a very honest account that I've read from various books, such as this book, Confessions. And I think that it is a very complicated thing, and it's not always easy to understand. And that is why I do that. And so I do want to understand the suffering. I want to understand why people experience what they do. But I also want to celebrate the mind and the power of the mind to overcome various troubles and various elements and being able to overcome pain. And I want to celebrate the art and the life and the beauty that comes out of people who suffer from various things because of the mind. And I definitely wanted to honor that with this video and definitely continue to honor that in this series. I hope that you found this discussion to be enlightening in a variety of ways. I hope that you found it to be stimulating and interesting in a lot of ways. And I hope that it helps give you an understanding of some of these things. I definitely recommend this book. Again, the book is by Thomas de Quincey, and it is called Confessions of an English Opium-Eater. And it's a very short book, about 80 pages, which is not very long at all, even for a romantic text, which might be more in depth. But I would describe the book as definitely being very well worth reading, and so I definitely encourage you to read it. These things are not easy to grapple with or understand, but this book at least gave me an understanding. And so yeah, let's celebrate the mind, let's celebrate art, and yeah, I'm Phoenix, and thank you for watching. Check out my other videos, and I will see you next time.